When it comes to methods of becoming literate in Japanese, there are two dominant schools of thought: the out-of-context approach and the in-context approach. The out-of-context approach is the more traditional, bottom-up way of approaching kanji. You sit down with a list of kanji and memorize how each character is written, all the things it can mean, and all the ways that it can be read. There are many variations of this approach depending on the order in which kanji are presented, the method by which information is committed to memory, and the amount of vocab that's learned alongside each character. Then we have the in-context approach, which is pretty much the exact opposite. Without any sort of systematic framework, you simply learn meanings and readings of kanji on a case-by-case basis as you come across them, either while working through some kind of vocabulary list or attempting to understand native Japanese. The book Remembering the Kanji by James Heisig can be thought of as a hybrid approach, lying directly in the crossroads of these two extremes. In this video, I'm going to attempt to present an argument for why the extremely misunderstood Remembering the Kanji is both more effective and more efficient than any version of the two traditional approaches. Now, I hate to play to authority like this, but I'm going to say this in an attempt to make my argument a little more convincing to the skeptics out there. I've personally reached a near native level of Japanese reading comprehension, so I like to think I know what I'm talking about. I speak from experience, not purely out of theory. Feel free to check the description for a link to a video of me demonstrating my reading ability. So let's get started. Now, if you had to choose one of the two traditional approaches, the in-context approach would be without a doubt the right choice. So let me start off by explaining what the in-context approach gets right and what the out-of-context approach gets wrong. There are two interrelated reasons for the effectiveness of the in-context approach. One is that the in-context approach plays to the strengths of the learning mechanism of the brain, and the other is that the in-context approach is better adapted to the true nature of kanji use in Japanese. Let's start by talking about the brain. For the sake of this video, I'm going to make a distinction between intellectual knowledge and functional or intuitive knowledge. Intellectual knowledge is factual information that you learned consciously. If I asked you what company created your iPhone and you answered Apple, that would be an example of conscious intellectual knowledge. On the other hand, if I gave you the two English phrases, the big red dog and the red big dog, it probably wouldn't be difficult for you to tell me which one of those is more natural, even though you most likely have no conscious knowledge of the grammar rule that explains why. This is an example of intuitive knowledge. Let's look at another example. You've probably seen a text like this before. Even though all of the letters inside the words are rearranged, if you're fluent in English, you should have no trouble deciphering the text. This is proof that fluent reading ability is not reliant on conscious intellectual knowledge of how words are spelled, but intuitive knowledge of the general appearance of words. When you're reading a language you're fluent in, you're actually not looking at individual letters and sounding out words. Your mind sees whole words, or even whole groups of words, as indivisible little pictures. This is why you have no trouble reading words that you don't know how to spell. And when you do misspell a word, you know it looks wrong, even though you may not know the correct spelling. This tells us that intuitive knowledge does not guarantee intellectual knowledge. And the reverse is also true. If I pulled my mom aside and explained to her the general facial differences between Japanese people and Korean people, she almost certainly wouldn't immediately become able to apply that intellectual knowledge and successfully tell them apart. She would need some practice. So intuitive knowledge and intellectual knowledge are completely separate. And if we need intuitive knowledge in order to be able to read Japanese fluently, then we have to ask, how is intuitive knowledge gained in the first place? I feel like the average person would answer this question by saying, first, you gain conscious intellectual knowledge, and then, through repetitive practice, that knowledge naturally converts into unconscious intuitive knowledge. But given the apparent separation between intuitive knowledge and intellectual knowledge, this just sounds a little fishy. How to ride a bike. How to tell if somebody's lying. How to turn in a late assignment without getting marked down. It seems that we gain most of the intuitive knowledge that we acquire throughout our lifetime through direct experience. The subconscious mind is a pattern recognition machine, and a much better one than you could ever hope to be consciously. Here's an illuminating example from the book Incognito: The Secret Lives of the Brain by David Eagleman. I quote, "The Japanese invented a method of sexing chicks known as vent sexing, by which expert chicken sexers could rapidly ascertain the sex of one-day-old hatchlings. The mystery was that no one could explain exactly how it was done. It was somehow based on very subtle visual cues, but the professional sexers could not report what those cues were. Instead, they would look at the chick's rear, where the vent is, and simply seem to know the correct bin to throw it in. And this is how the professionals taught the student sexers. The master would stand over the apprentice and watch. The student would pick up a chick, examine its rear, and toss it into one bin or the other. The master would give feedback, yes or no. After weeks on end of this activity, the student's brain was trained up to masterful, albeit unconscious, levels, unquote. Now hold on to that thought while I go back to kanji for a second. Despite what you may have been told, kanji don't really have readings. Above all, a kanji character represents meaning. I mean, that's why the same set of characters is able to be used across multiple completely different languages. How a given character is pronounced is really only an afterthought, and this is especially true when talking about Japanese. Due to the complicated history of the Japanese language, most kanji in Japanese can be pronounced very many ways. And I'm not just talking about kunyomi versus onyomi. Not only do many kanji have multiple of both kunyomi and onyomi readings, but those kunyomi and onyomi readings also tend to get morphed and warped in difficult to predict ways depending on the specific usage. Not to mention that it's not uncommon for entirely new, completely unpredictable, one-off readings to get created just for a single word. Combine all of that with the fact that many kanji have multiple, oftentimes completely unrelated meanings, and we're faced with the ugly reality of kanji usage in Japanese. It's a complete and utter mess. So if you were to attempt to rely entirely on conscious, intellectual knowledge to read kanji, not only would you have to memorize a boatload of different meanings and readings, but you'd also have to memorize a boatload of complicated rules and exceptions about usage as well. Now it might seem obvious, but think about this for a second. This video is about how to learn kanji, and if you don't know kanji yet, then most likely you don't know Japanese yet. How the hell is someone who doesn't know Japanese supposed to be able to understand and remember all of those complicated usage rules when those rules themselves are directly related to the specific structures of Japanese? Remember the example I gave earlier about how even if I explained to my mom how to tell the difference between a Japanese face and a Korean face, she still wouldn't be able to tell the difference? Well, it's the same principle here. Intellectual knowledge is completely separate from intuitive knowledge. So not only is all of that conscious memorization of readings and rules going to take outrageous amounts of time, it isn't actually going to help you become able to read real Japanese. You're just going to have a bunch of loose readings and rules floating around in your head, while when you actually stare at a Japanese text, 90% of the time the necessary knowledge isn't going to be there when you need it. No wonder the traditional Japanese learner hates kanji so much. But if you take the in-context approach, you can bypass all of this pain and struggle. Just temporarily forget the idea that individual kanji have independent readings and meanings, and simply learn the readings and meanings of whole words as you actually come across them. Treat each kanji compound as an individual picture, just like how you read your native language, without worrying about the specific details of all the little strokes. And as you continue to learn more and more words this way, what will start to happen over time is that when you come across new words, you'll somehow be able to tell how they're going to be pronounced, as well as what they most likely mean. You'll start to develop an instinctive, functional knowledge of the readings and meanings of each kanji. Eventually, even when being shown individual kanji out of context, it will become easy to reflect upon your intuitive knowledge and deduct the isolated meanings and readings of characters. It sounds like magic, but it's not. It's the same phenomenon as the chick sexing example. The subconscious mind is a pattern recognition machine. All you need to do is supply your subconscious with enough raw data, and it will do all of the calculations for you. Let me flesh out the effectiveness of this approach a little more. If you were to take the out-of-context approach to learning kanji, that would mean attempting to learn multiple readings and meanings at the exact same time out of context. But by doing this, you're working directly against your own memory. Trying to learn readings out of context is going to make them extremely difficult to remember because you're not going to have anything to anchor them down to or connect them with in your mind. Some versions of the out-of-context approach try to remedy this by teaching you words alongside the kanji, but this creates the new problem of memory interference. Learning a bunch of similar information at the same time is a recipe for getting it jumbled up and confused in your head. Let me give you a real example that I heard from a Wanikani user. When learning this kanji, the onyomi jin and nin were learned together, along with example words that use each of the readings. But the user ended up continually confusing which words use which of these readings, to the point where he started doing things like, I always get this one wrong, and I think this one's jin, which means it's probably actually nin. If you're remembering that you're not remembering, you have a problem. The in-context approach completely bypasses both of these issues. First, by only learning kanji as you actually come across words that use them in real-life situations, you always have a strong contextual anchor to connect the information to. And secondly, different readings almost never interfere with each other because each of the readings are learned spread out throughout time. Now, just for the sake of completion, let me refute one last argument that I occasionally hear for the out-of-context approach. But that's how Japanese people learn kanji. Yes, Japanese kids learn kanji using a version of the out-of-context approach. But let's not forget that by the time Japanese kids begin learning kanji in first grade, they're already fluent in Japanese. If we're talking about Japanese kanji, learning how to read a language that you're already fluent in can't be compared to trying to learn how to read a language that you don't know yet. A Japanese kid isn't going to mix up or have trouble remembering readings because all of that information already exists inside of their head. They're simply mapping specific characters onto a database of all the different things that can be pronounced. Also, let us not forget that it takes Japanese kids 9 years to learn the 2000 Joyo kanji. I don't know about you, but I don't have that kind of time. Okay, so not only does the in-context approach require only a fraction of the effort that the out-of-context approach does, but by taking advantage of subconscious pattern recognition abilities, it's also infinitely more effective. But although the in-context approach is far superior to the out-of-context approach, it has its own set of pitfalls. The first of these being that the beginning stage of the process has an extremely steep learning curve. Recall that in the in-context approach, you're learning full kanji compounds from the get-go, treating whole words almost like pictures, without worrying about trying to remember all of the specific little strokes. Through this, what starts to happen is that your brain gets better and better at recognizing and storing information about kanji, until eventually learning to read new characters becomes virtually effortless. They say that a chess master can memorize an entire chessboard just by looking at it for a few seconds, and it's the same principle at work here. As your brain uses pattern recognition to develop a more and more complex internal infrastructure related to kanji, the cognitive load of storing new information about kanji continues to reduce exponentially. But on the other hand, when you're first starting out, naturally your brain isn't going to have any of this kanji infrastructure in place yet, and so initially it's going to take a lot of time and repetition in order to remember the appearance of characters. Not to mention that with this method, since you're learning whole words through context, you're attempting to learn not only the appearance, but also the meaning as well as the pronunciation of words all at the same time, which is going to be quite a mental workout for a newcomer to Japanese. The next downside of an in-context approach is that although you will develop a rather strong ability to recognize characters in context, because the approach doesn't force you to pay attention to the nuances of individual characters, you'll most likely end up confusing similar-looking kanji. Without any sort of formal, out-of-context study, characters like these are almost guaranteed to trip you up now and again, even after you've reached general fluency in reading. Now admittedly, this point is not detrimental, because as long as you're not caught off guard and quizzed on something out of context, you will have a very strong and intuitive ability to read real Japanese text. But in my opinion, the biggest issue with a purely in-context approach is that you'll never become able to write out kanji characters from memory. This shouldn't be surprising if you recall that it's quite common to be able to read words that you can't spell. Being able to recognize something is completely different from being able to recall something from memory, and one does not automatically imply the other. No matter how fluent you get at reading through an in-context approach, when you attempt to recall a kanji from memory, although you'll likely be able to see a vague outline of the character in your mind's eye, you won't be able to recall most of the specific strokes. Now, many would argue that not being able to write out kanji from memory isn't a problem, since in today's world, people hardly write out things by hand anyway. As long as you can type, you're fine. Now, on a practical level, there is a lot of truth to this, but realistically, if you're ever planning on living in Japan, it is going to be quite inconvenient to not be able to write out characters from memory, for example, whenever you have to fill out a form or take notes on the fly. I also occasionally hear people saying stuff like, even Japanese people can barely write out kanji from memory. But this is complete bullshit. Any Japanese adult that graduated from high school has spent thousands of hours taking notes by hand, and although they may forget a character here and there, just like native English speakers occasionally forget how to spell a word, claiming that they can't write Japanese out by hand is completely ridiculous. And I don't know about you, but personally, I don't want to be functionally inferior to native speakers in any way. So, the out-of-context approach suffers from taking an immense amount of time, which will be undoubtedly filled with immeasurable pain and suffering, only to produce mostly inapplicable conscious knowledge. While on the other hand, the in-context approach suffers from a steep learning curve and not allowing you to develop the ability to write out characters from memory. Well, remembering the kanji solves all of these issues without creating any new ones. Let me explain exactly how. One important concept that you need to understand is that due to the way your mind organizes information, it's easier to build onto and learn more about things that you already know than learn something completely new. Let me give you a really stupid example. If I hypothetically told you that in addition to signifying a type of fruit, the word apple also had the new slang meaning of an attractive female, that would be a lot easier for you to remember than if I told you that the word Zorola meant the same thing. That's because you already have an entry for the word apple inside your mental dictionary, and adding additional information to a pre-existing entry in your mental dictionary doesn't require a lot of effort. On the other hand, you've never heard the word Zorola before, since I just made it up, and so in order to remember it, you would have to create an entirely new entry in your mental dictionary, which is significantly more difficult. In the first case, you're associating something new with something that you already know, whereas in the second case, you're associating something new with something that you don't know, which requires at least twice as much work for your memory. What remembering the kanji does is allow you to easily remember the written form and one basic meaning of all of the regularly used kanji characters. Said another way, remembering the kanji helps you create an entry for every kanji inside your mental dictionary. This is extremely powerful because once you have that basic entry for each kanji, adding on all of the additional meanings and readings will only take a fraction of the effort. This is especially true if you then go on to use an in-context based approach, such as sentence mining, which will not only allow you to bypass the sort of memory interference issues I discussed earlier, but will also allow you to acquire intuitive and functional knowledge of kanji usage, instead of knowledge that is merely intellectual. Also, because remembering the kanji teaches you the written forms of characters, not only does it remedy the issue of not being able to write out kanji from memory, but it also allows you to avoid confusing similar characters. So basically, in one clean swoop, remembering the kanji allows you to benefit from all of the magic of the in-context approach, while removing the issues of the steep learning curve, confusing similar characters out of context, and inability to write out characters from memory. Okay, so we've established that by easily and efficiently allowing you to create mental dictionary entries for each character, remembering the kanji does all of the heavy lifting for you when it comes to gaining literacy in Japanese. But how exactly does it make creating those dictionary entries so easy? Well, the first innovation that remembering the kanji made has to do with the order that kanji are presented in. You see, when it comes to deciding what order kanji should be learned in, there are three different factors that could be taken into account: the meaning of characters, the components that make up characters, and the usage frequency of characters. The problem is that all three of these factors are completely independent from one another. For example, just because a character is used extremely often, or has a very simple and straightforward meaning, doesn't mean that it will be simple to write. Conversely, just because a character only has 2 strokes, doesn't mean that it has a basic meaning or that it's commonly used. So when it comes to deciding what order to learn kanji in, we have to sacrifice some of these factors in order to prioritize others. In Japanese schools, the usage frequency of characters and the components that comprise characters are ignored in order to prioritize the simplicity of characters' meanings. For example, although the extremely common character for politics isn't taught until 5th grade, the much less frequently used character for shellfish is taught in 1st grade. The character for sky is comprised of these 2 simple characters. But although sky is taught in 1st grade, this character for whole isn't taught until 6th grade, and this character for craft isn't taught until 2nd grade. But this makes perfect sense, because while young children don't yet have a broad knowledge of abstract concepts, they do have excellent memories, so rote memorizing characters with many strokes isn't too much of an issue. In other words, children in Japan are taught possibly uncommon or difficult to write characters that have simple meanings before they're taught simple characters with abstract meanings, because they're good at memorizing yet bad at understanding abstract concepts. But if you're learning kanji as an adult, taking this approach makes absolutely no sense. You do have a broad knowledge of concepts, yet your memory sucks. So it should be pretty obvious that when choosing an order to learn the kanji in, it's going to be most efficient to prioritize the components that comprise the characters over the meaning of the characters. And this is exactly what remembering the kanji does. The kanji are sorted in such a way so that nearly every character you learn is simply a combination of 2 or 3 characters that you already know. So for example, first you learn that this means craft, and that this means whole, and then you learn that craft plus whole equals sky. So instead of trying to remember that a random blob of squiggly lines means sky, you simply have A plus B equals C, which of course is infinitely easier to remember. The genius of remembering the kanji is that it's arranged in a way such that all 2000 Joyo kanji can be learned in this fashion. Now, one common criticism of remembering the kanji that you often hear is that due to what I have just explained, some uncommon characters are learned early on, while some extremely common characters are not learned until the end. But when fully thought through, this criticism falls apart pretty quick. First of all, if you're planning on becoming able to fluently read Japanese, you're gonna need to know all the kanji. And so if you're gonna be learning them all anyway, doesn't it make most sense to learn them in the order that makes them easiest to learn? Does it really make more sense to learn town before measurement, just because town is far more common? But in order to be fully literate in Japanese, you need to know them both? And learning measurement before town will take far less total time? What I'm saying is that if your goal is real fluency, then the true quickest path involves learning some uncommon characters before other common ones. Plus, if you go through remembering the kanji at the rate that I recommend, then it's going to take you less than 3 months total to learn all 2000 Joyo kanji anyway. And in the grand scheme of things, that's hardly any time at all. The second innovation that remembering the kanji made was introducing a powerful system of mnemonics, which works with the optimized order the kanji are presented in, to reduce the cognitive load of learning and remembering characters even further. Did you know that competitive memorizing is a thing? There's a whole subculture of people who do things like memorize literally thousands of digits of pi, or memorize the order of an entire shuffled deck of playing cards in under a minute. Now, most people would probably assume that these guys are just freaks of nature, but in reality, they're just average people who are using clever, yet simple techniques which allow you to take advantage of the human mind's natural capacity to remember. You see, back in the caveman days, your ability to remember your way back home, or what the berry that gave you diarrhea looked like, was literally a matter of life or death. So naturally, over time, this type of visual memory became quite developed. Think about it, you probably don't have too much trouble remembering the basic layout of your elementary school, or even the face of your 5th grade teacher for that matter. But on the other hand, cavemen didn't have any need to remember abstract information like the year of a historic event, or the name of someone you only met once a few years ago. So basically, what those competitive memorizers are doing is taking abstract information, like digits of pi, and systematically converting it into the kind of visual information that the brain's so good at remembering. And that's exactly how remembering the kanji works. It helps you associate kanji and common components of kanji with easily recognizable visual images, which you can then combine to create unique images for each kanji that will be effortless to remember. Let me give you an example. Picture, as vividly as you can, an old craftsman, a sword maker, who works all day in his worn-down, dimly lit workshop. Now imagine that there's a circular hole in the roof of his workshop, which the craftsman has cut in order to let in sunlight. Now really see him banging away at the sword he's working on, sweat running down his forehead. And then see him stop, take a deep breath, and then squint while looking up at the blue sky, which he can see through the big hole in his roof. Craft plus hole equals sky. Assuming you already knew the characters for craft and hole, then if you really picture that image vividly enough, it's extremely unlikely that you'll be forgetting the kanji for sky anytime soon. The last big innovation that remembering the kanji made was giving each kanji a single, unique English keyword. I already talked about how the real point of going through remembering the kanji is to create a unique entry for every kanji in your mental dictionary so that you can learn to write out characters from memory, as well as become able to efficiently gain intuitive knowledge of kanji usage through context. Recall that these mental dictionary entries consist of connecting two pieces of information, what the character looks like and the basic meaning of the character. I also explained earlier that the ability to recognize something does not automatically imply the ability to recall that thing from memory. Just because you can read a word doesn't mean that you'll be able to spell it. Just because you can look at a kanji and recall the meaning doesn't mean that you have the ability to recall how to write that kanji from memory. So what that means is that because we want to be able to write out characters from memory, we need to arrange our mental dictionary entries in such a way that allows us to recall how the character is written, given the meaning. In other words, when we make SRS flashcards to review the kanji that we've learned, we need to have the meaning on the front of the card and be using that to recall the character completely from memory. But this is a tricky issue, because many kanji have extremely similar, if not completely identical, meanings to each other. So if we simply used a list of the most common meanings of each kanji as the cue for us to recall how the kanji is written, we would be bound to get kanji with similar meanings confused with each other. Remembering the kanji solves this problem by giving each character a single unique keyword. Now, many people complain about these keywords, saying that many of them do not totally correspond with the precise meaning of the kanji, or that the keywords themselves are outlandish and difficult to remember. Now, this is completely true, and admittedly, it's pretty much the one real drawback of remembering the kanji. But you see, there isn't really any possible alternatives. It's crucial that each and every kanji have a unique cue which allows us to recall how that kanji is written. And because so many kanji have similar meanings, and there are just so many kanji in general, of course we're going to end up with an awkward keyword here and there. But for example, if each kanji were given multiple keywords in order to more accurately grasp the exact meaning of the character and avoid resorting to unfamiliar vocabulary, this would mean that many of these keywords would overlap between kanji with similar meanings. This would be a total disaster, because not only is trying to remember a list exceedingly more difficult than remembering a single word, but because many of these lists would contain overlapping keywords with each other, it would be a recipe for memory interference and confusion. Also, because we don't know Japanese yet, we can't use Japanese vocabulary or kanji readings to create unique cues to recall characters. Now, about the keywords not totally representing the meaning of some characters. Well, the real point of remembering the kanji is simply to help you create a mental dictionary entry for each character, so that you can then gain intuitive knowledge of readings and meanings through context. So, as long as you make that dictionary entry, whether or not you have a perfect understanding of the kanji's meaning doesn't really matter. Plus, in reality, it's not like you could actually gain an accurate understanding of a kanji's exact meaning from reading a longer, more exact English definition anyway. The only way to truly get what a kanji means is to see exactly how it's used in multiple contexts, and until then, your understanding is only superficial. This is why remembering the kanji, which is all about getting you out into the real world of Japanese as soon as possible, is the only method that actually has its priorities straight. So to conclude, dealing with a few weird keywords here and there is a small price to pay, because it allows us to have an entirely unique one-to-one cue for each kanji, even before we know Japanese, which in turn allows us to efficiently create mental dictionary entries for each kanji so that we can begin to collect intuitive knowledge of kanji usage through context as soon as possible, while at the same time gaining the ability to write out kanji from memory. When viewed from the biggest picture, this is by far the most efficient path to mastery of written Japanese. Now real quick, let's compare remembering the kanji to some of its competitors. First, wanikani. Wanikani is obviously inspired by remembering the kanji, so naturally it gets a lot right. Kanji are presented in an efficient order, and mnemonics are employed to further aid memorization. That said, the mnemonics are given to you pre-made in the form of little stories, instead of encouraging you to create your own, highly personal, vivid mnemonic visualizations like remembering the kanji does, so gotta take a few points off there. Next, it's a paid service. It costs money, which isn't ideal, but also isn't a deal breaker. But it also forces you to use its personal, built-in SRS, and although that's a drag on its own, it also means that if you want to keep reviewing, so that you can not forget what you've already learned, then you have to keep paying, which is pretty lame. But by far the biggest issue with wanikani is that it has you learn isolated kanji readings, as well as vocab, out of context. I already spoke at length about how due to the issue of how this sort of conscious, intellectual knowledge is not only extremely difficult to remember, but also detached from intuitive knowledge and therefore impractical, it's most efficient to use out-of-context study simply to create a mental dictionary entry for each character so that extensive knowledge of readings and meanings can then be easily gained intuitively through context. So it should be clear why this is the biggest problem with wanikani. Like I said earlier, learning a bunch of similar information at the same time out of context is a recipe for memory interference. Hence, people getting forever doomed to confuse when hito is read nin and when it's read jin. And a natural corollary of this inefficiency is that it's going to take you a good long while to actually get all of the material into your memory. And the creators of wanikani knew this, which is why they made it so that you were literally forced to go through wanikani at a snail's pace. Apparently, if you learn as fast as the wanikani system lets you, it will still take you around 18 months to get through the most common 2000 kanji. Again, it takes less than 3 months to get through remembering the kanji. And the nail in the coffin is that wanikani's built-in SRS never has you write out kanji from memory. It only has you recall the meaning given the kanji. And as we already know, the ability to recognize something does not imply the ability to recall that thing from memory, so wanikani users will likely lack the ability to write out kanji from memory to a large degree. I think a friend of mine once summed up wanikani perfectly when they said, Honestly, I feel like most people use WaniKani because they saw the pretty UI and associated it with effectiveness. Up next, the Kodansha Kanji Learners course. Just like WaniKani, KKLC appears to have been highly inspired by remembering the kanji, and was most likely created with the intention to improve upon the original. But also similar to WaniKani, unfortunately the people at Kodansha confused some of remembering the kanji's best features for bugs, and in an attempt to fix these non-bugs, actually ended up creating a far less efficient product. It gets the order of presenting kanji and the idea of using mnemonics right, but that's about it. The biggest problem with KKLC is that it tries to teach you multiple meanings and multiple readings out of context at the same time. In this regard, it's actually worse than WaniKani, because although WaniKani still teaches you readings and vocab out of context, it at least teaches you them throughout time. First, you learn what the kanji looks like, then a few weeks later, you learn the readings. The guys at WaniKani have some understanding that overloading you with too much information at once is highly inefficient. It's much better to first just make the mental dictionary entry, then fill it in later. Now with WaniKani, when you do learn the readings, you learn multiple at the same time, which is a pretty bad idea. But at least they don't have you trying to learn readings on the same day that you first learn the character. On the other hand, the Kodansha Kanji Learners course just dumps all of the readings and meanings onto you at once, which is a seriously inefficient way to cram abstract information into your brain, as well as a recipe for memory interference. The next issue is that KKLC doesn't have single, unique keywords for each kanji. Instead, it has a list of keywords, usually ranging from 1 to 3 words. Now, if you've been paying attention, hopefully you understand why this is a huge problem. Recall that the first purpose of out-of-context study is to create mental dictionary entries for each kanji so that you can efficiently learn the exact nuances of how characters are used through context. So like I said earlier, it doesn't really matter if the keywords you're using tell you exactly what the kanji means, since you need to learn that through context anyway. So the first job of keywords is to make creating mental dictionary entries as easy as possible. KKLC attempts to improve upon remembering the kanji by adding multiple, more accurate keywords for each kanji, in order to help you gain a better grasp of what each kanji means. But in reality, this is just giving you much more information that you have to memorize out of context, which is going to significantly slow down the process of creating mental dictionary entries. But this is only the more minor of the two issues with KKLC's keywords. Recall that the second purpose of out-of-context study is to help you become able to write out kanji from memory. In remembering the kanji, each character has one unique keyword, so you can make SRS cards in which you recall how to write the kanji given the keyword, which will guarantee that you will retain the ability to write out kanji from memory. But with KKLC, each character has a list of keywords, and many of the words on these lists overlap with each other. This is a big issue, because associating a character with a list of keywords is much harder than associating a character with a single unique keyword. And since many of the words in these lists overlap, trying to remember the exact list for each kanji is going to be a recipe for memory interference and confusion. In addition to the list of keywords, you could add other information, such as readings and vocab, to the front of your SRS cards in order to help you identify the exact character, but having characters associated with a long list of information is going to create much weaker memories than having them each associated with one precise keyword. I'm just repeating myself, but the nature of remembering the kanji keywords is a feature, not a bug. And to make one last small point, just like WaniKani, KKLC presents you with pre-made mnemonics to remember the characters, instead of encouraging you to create your own, highly personal, vivid mnemonic visualizations like remembering the kanji does, and this isn't desirable. I was going to go over a few more remembering the kanji alternatives, but because this video is already getting so long, I'm just going to leave it at these two. If you understand all of the points I made in the first half of this video, then you should have no trouble understanding the specific issues with any other method of learning kanji that you're considering. Now before I end this video, I want to talk a bit about why I recommend making going through remembering the kanji the very first thing you do upon starting your journey to Japanese mastery, even before learning any grammar or vocab. The logic goes like this. Going through remembering the kanji is going to take you the same amount of time no matter where you are in the larger process of learning Japanese. And having a dictionary entry for each kanji in your head will allow you to take away much more from each moment you spend with written Japanese. So it goes to reason that the overall most efficient route to getting good at Japanese is to knock remembering the kanji out of the way first thing, so that you can let the benefits begin to accumulate as soon as possible. And on a similar line of reasoning, the more time you spend each day learning kanji, the sooner you'll be finished. So rather than splitting your daily study time into kanji and grammar, it's overall more efficient to do nothing but kanji, so that after that you can move on to doing nothing but grammar while reaping the benefits of knowing the kanji. And if you're in the context of the AJAP method, doing no active study but kanji for the first few months isn't as much of an apparent setback as you might think. You see, when you first start listening to a foreign language, you can't even tell where one word ends and another word begins. It just sounds like a gobbledygook of sound. But just by listening to raw audio in the language for a few hundred hours, your brain slowly becomes able to parse all of the individual sounds. If you can't even hear what vowels and consonants are being said, then you don't have a shot in hell of making out actual vocab and sentences. So the very first step to becoming able to understand spoken Japanese doesn't require an ounce of active study. So basically, it naturally goes to reason that if one wishes to master Japanese as efficiently as possible, the first step is to use your active study time to learn the kanji, and then use the rest of your spare time throughout the day to immerse yourself in Japanese audio as much as possible. Now of course, this first step to learning Japanese isn't going to be very fun. No one's denying that. Memorizing characters out of context, and listening to gibberish that you don't understand. Day after day, seemingly making no progress. Many people lose patience halfway through, and come up with a story to justify their own lack of determination. But if you ever find yourself nearing such a situation, try to remember that sometimes your own progress isn't so easy to see.
For 4 days I've been busting my ass. I haven't learned a goddamn thing.
You learned plenty.
I learned plenty. I learned how to sand your decks, maybe. I wax your car, paint your house, paint your fence. I learned plenty, right?
Not everything is as seems.
Oh, bullshit. I'm going home, man.
Daniel-san! Daniel-san!
What?
Come here. Show me wax on, wax off. That! Show me paint the fence. Show me side to side. Show me sand or floor. Oi. Hey, look eye. Always look eye. Come back tomorrow.
Okay, that's all I got. Sorry if you didn't get that reference at the end. If this video was useful to you, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd like to give a super special shout out to Nihongo Heeb, Elhendi, Isaac, King, Phantom Madman, Brody, Juice J, Mark, and all my other patrons for supporting me. See you next time, guys.